Ryan and Eric, who would you say some of your favorite guests are that we've had on the podcast?
Ryan, I would say it was your dad, a Vietnam veteran that had intense action stories as well as touching and meaningful, content about, his life and yours.
That's true. I do have to say my dad, he has to be my favorite, but a close second would probably be COVID virologist.
Oh, that was amazing. I'd say it's a toss-up between Jason Weems, who is a comedian who died on stage and was resurrected to be on our podcast and raise his family and other things, other responsibilities. And we also had a Marine One, or like presidential helicopter pilot on the show, and that was crazy.
That's a good one. That's hard to beat. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, tune into the Baggage Podcast, where four friends, a prosecutor, a doctor, a comedian, and a journalist, interview ordinary people about their extraordinary experiences. Search for Baggage wherever you get your podcast.
On today's edition of Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards, our guest is Dr. Jack Stoltzfus. Dr. Stoltzfus is a licensed psychologist in Minnesota. As America's launch coach, he has a mission to help parents successfully launch their children on the path to adulthood while maintaining a caring bond with them. His new book, The Parent's Launch Code, Loving and Letting Go of Our Adult Children, was released last summer. Let's join today's conversation with Dr. Jack Stoltzfus.
You are listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello again, and welcome to this episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thanks for joining me for today's show. My guest is Dr. Jack Stoltzfus. Hello, Dr. Jack, and welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So my son went to college in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, where there's the highest concentration of Amish people in the country. And the most common last name among the Irish there is Stoltzfus. So can you trace your own roots to that original colony?
Yeah, you've detected that likely connection I have. Yes, I trace my roots back to Nicholas Stoltzfus, who came over in 1770 and had the pledge to the king, when he came over. So that's the root of all the Stoltzfuses from Nicholas. So there's a house near Reading now that is Nicholas Stoltzfus's house. So yeah, I kind of left the fold. I'm no longer Amish, but
okay,
and live in Minnesota at this point. But I certainly have those roots.
So how often are you asked about your name?
Only by people. Well, people say that's an unusual name. In Minnesota, there aren't too many around, but obviously out east, most people, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, that kind of area, are aware of that name. So it's pretty familiar. Yeah. Okay.
So let's get into the topic here, which is parents and their adult children.
Yeah.
So in the Pew Study 2020, 52% of young adults ages 18 to 29 live with one or both parents. And that's the highest percentage ever. Why is that?
Well, that's come down a little bit, but it was that was actually at a time around COVID too. So we had 30% of college students going back, and that inflated that number somewhat. Right now, it's in the 30% range, although Gen Zs are still 57% at home, but they're still a little bit younger group. But I do think it reflects this trend of what I call elongation of young adulthood, or you could say elongation of adolescence. So that it's taking more time for young adults to move forward in terms of the typical adult kinds of tasks, getting a job, buying a house, getting married, having a family, that type of thing. And I have my own theory about that. And I think it's because starting with my generation, and I'm a boomer. You may be a boomer too. I don't know.
I'm an older Xer, so I'm at the beginning.
Okay. Starting with the boomers, I think we became much more invested in the happiness and success of our kids than past generations. I think my parents, hey, they raised me to 18 or whatever. You're on your own now. I've done my job. But I think with our generation, my boomer generation, we started to shift more from, okay, I raised you, now you're on your own, to, okay, I raised you, but I'm concerned about you. I've been more concerned about your happiness and your success. And so that just continues on. You're 18 and you're not happy. You're 20, you're not happy, and you're not succeeding. I stay involved. And it probably inadvertently sends a message to the young adult that maybe they're not capable because the parents keep hanging on and trying to help them. So to me, that's the biggest contributor. But, there are other factors too. Economically right now, it's tough for young adults to, even afford an apartment, and homes are almost out of reach for many young adults at this stage. So it's not one simple answer. So
how do you help parents navigate the challenging transition by assisting them to let go while maintaining a positive connection to their adult children?
Yeah, Melvin, that's my definition of a successful launch is that the young adult has moved into self-sufficient and responsible independence while maintaining a caring connection with the parent. And that's a little bit of a twist that I put on it that maybe most people who do research and write in this area don't necessarily include. That they're happy saying, okay, he's got a job, he's living on his own, he's self-sufficient, so he's launched. But there's a growing trend these days for young adults to cut off their relationship with their parents. It's referred to as estrangement, that the young adults are estranged from their parents. They're not talking to them. They're not communicating and connecting. And to me, that's a failure of the normal process. The normal process should be the parents work with the young adult to leave. They leave and they help them. And yeah, there's some sadness and letting go, but you keep this positive relationship with them. So my goal is to try to shift the parents into a role of from a directing and controlling position to a consulting and coaching and collaborating position, and partner with the young adult on their plans. And I usually use a 5-year timeline. So, 5 years out, what does the young adult want to be doing? Where do they want to be living? And I get that kind of plan laid out. And incidentally, when I ask that question to the young adult, where do you want to be living in 5 years from now? None of them have said, I just want to be living with mommy and daddy. So they're motivated to be independent as well. But it's getting the parents and the young adult to work together toward that goal. We're partnering with you. We're not. So we shift out of the day-to-day, why are you up so late playing video games? You're not bussing your dishes back from your bedroom, to where are we going together? How can we work together? So that's the way I think I get parents and young adults to work together on this process, rather than kind of, the contentious type of relationships that sometimes can develop. And if you get that partnership, you're more apt to get a positive outcome where they stay connected to the young adult. So,
okay. So I'm the father of 4 adult children and stepfather of 2 teenagers. So I've gone through the process on one hand, and I'm in the middle of the process, or the beginnings of the process again. So my theory of this is, I say that guilt makes people do things they ordinarily wouldn't do. And with so many families shattered by divorce these days, parents are feeling more guilty than ever, I believe. Mm-hmm. So how much are parents' actions making it more difficult for their children to launch?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. My website is called parentslettinggo.com, which reflects both my interest in working with parents and also the problem that parents deal with. And I think it's too much hanging on, too much trying to be sure they're happy, trying to be sure they're successful. And I think a lot of times not allowing the young adult or the teenager to fail and face the consequences of a failure, to bail them out. Oh, he's driving, he got a ticket. Okay, well, we'll pay for the ticket. No, you shouldn't pay for the ticket. The kid wants to drive the car, but there's no gas in the car. Well, why don't you get a job and put gas in the car, then you can drive the car? But if we're taking over and doing those things for them, it's not helping them to develop a certain resilience or grit that it allows them to transition into that young adulthood. So I think we've got to be thinking about that. And parents will ask you, how do you balance support and firmness? I sometimes call it love and backbone. And I say, ask yourself 3 questions when you're trying to decide what is the right thing to do. One is my action or my decision based on love and not fear, guilt, anger, frustration, or whatever? 2, is my decision or action aligned with my principles? Honesty, responsibility, meeting your promises, that type of thing. And the third thing is my decision or action likely to increase their independence or increase their dependency? So I think a parent kind of goes through that and says, okay, should I do this? Should I pay for this? Okay, let me think about that. And, typically I say, if you're going to pay for something, be sure that your teen or young adult has skin in the game. Okay, I'll pay half. I'll match you, or I'll help you with some seed money, but you're going to have to come up with the rest of the money or whatever it is that you need to do. So,
okay. So do you think young adults today are more immature, or are parents more clingy?
Are parents more
clingy?
I think the answer is yes. I know it's an either or, but I think it's both. 60% of parents enjoy having their young adults living at home. 43%, 48% or something. Parents consider their young adult one of their best friends. So the relationship has changed. There's some good things about that. I mean, they're getting along better. They're closer. I think I'm much closer to my kids. Now they're young adults, but than I was to my parents. So there is a certain kind of clinging that goes on there. A certain kind of hanging on from both sides. Over 50% of young adults consider their parent to be their best friend too. So it's not all bad, but you need to get to that point where you got to let go of each other, and I think that's hard. I mean, it's harder for parents today to do that. And I think that the next generations, the Gen X's and the millennials are maybe even more invested in their children, in the success of their children. But we started the trophy generation. The boomers did. Everybody gets a trophy. We got to be careful about their self-esteem, and I think that's set the stage for some of what's continued to happen with the next generations of parents.
All right. So what can parents do to successfully let go and launch their young adult?
Well, I have in my book, The Parent's Launch Code, I go through 6 practices that are really important to creating the launch pad and ultimately to a successful launch. The first one is communicating unconditional love to your teenager or young adult. That's really that what that says is that creates a security in the relationship. So you tell them you love them no matter what. And that's different from approving their behavior. There's a distinction there. But in their darkest moments out there, if they know, okay, no matter what, my parents love me and they're going to be there for me emotionally, that allows them to feel like they can risk at that point. And then I argue that I think parents should not just step back, because there's kind of a common view that, well, when they're 18, 19, you just step back. But I think that can feel like almost abandonment, or I don't want anything to do with you anymore. And I think rather parents should shift from controlling and directing to being more consultants and collaborators and partners, helping them with their 5-year plan, helping them develop their own identity. So the support is shifted to more supporting them going forward. So that's the second one. Those are 2 are foundational: unconditional love and building this relationship with them. Then there's 2 practices I call healing practices. and their apology and forgiveness, I think parents that I talk with I feel like are the kind of guiltiest segment of our population. And particularly if there's some problems with their kids. Well, it must have been that we went through a divorce, or it must have been, I wasn't there for them. I was too busy or something. And that's why they're having trouble. And therefore I need to coddle them a little bit more, help do more for them. But I tell parents, look, the best thing you can do for that is to just apologize. Identify something, maybe the kids have brought it up or something you feel like you still feel guilty about, and just write a letter of apology. What that does is relieves some of the guilt with the parent, because the parent basically has to say, I can't do it over. If I could, I would. But it also softens any resentment that the young adult or kid, the teenager, might have toward you too. And it creates this opportunity for a more intimate connection, because you're sharing some vulnerability at that point with your young adult. I mean, when you're opening itself, you're up and saying, hey, I'm sorry. I think I didn't do this right, or I made a mistake here. Some parents have a tough time doing that. Well, I should be the authority. I should be always right. Well, kids know the parents make mistakes. I mean, they're not fooling anybody. So, and sometimes forgiveness is important. Sometimes parents have to forgive themselves for something they did, and sometimes they have to forgive their kids. I mean, if you get a hellraiser of a kid that's creating all kinds of problems, you're really angry, frustrated, maybe some resentment, but you've got to forgive them, or that relationship is not going to be a positive relationship going forward. The fifth practice is bringing together nurturance and firmness, which is the love and backbone, because in order for kids to launch, they need to experience some kind of firmness from the parents. Otherwise it's like they're trying to get out of a vat of jello, because the parent says, anything you want to do, or we'll support anything, and we'll give you money. Well, why do they have to stand up if the parents are standing up for them and doing everything for them? So that's when it's really important for parents to practice no, which is not a 4-letter word. No, I'm not going to give you money for that. Well, how am I going to be able to do it? Well, maybe think about getting a job, So that's where that firmness becomes really important. And the last practice is just letting go. And it's kind of a grief process. Even if you've had a difficult time with your teenager or young adult, it's just important to be able to say goodbye and to be able to make this shift from your primary focus on children to a focus now on a life apart from children. Let them go. Shift to now you and your spouse, if you're married still, to develop your own life together. So, and some parents have a hard time letting go. Even as the child leaves and gets married, they're still too involved in the child's life. So those are the practices. And my book pretty much lays out the guidelines for how to do that, so you can have the best chance of a positive launch of your young adult. So,
all right, that's some great advice, and I'll make sure I include the link for the book in the show notes.
Sure, thank you.
So, at what age should you become concerned that your teens are not on a path to launching?
Well, I work with. I don't know that if you're in the teens yet, that you should be highly concerned. I mean, there might be some early signs that they're too comfortable at home. But what I see is parents in their 20s, they're getting a little uncomfortable. They're 18, 20, when they maybe went to college. Now they're back home, and this is okay. It's nice to have you back home and all, but the parents are starting to think, okay, how long is this going to go on? But then, if they get to 26, 27, they're still home. The alarm bells are going off at that point, But, you have to start the process of letting go, obviously, earlier. I say when that baby is born and you're letting go and that toddler starts to kind of toddle away from you, it's a letting go process. And I always say we need to learn how to embrace and hold and show unconditional love, and then let go, hold and let go. And that goes throughout the family life cycle. So
Principles First is headed to the George W. Bush Presidential Center in Dallas to discuss the future of American leadership. Join us for an evening of good food, great company, and engaging discussion on the campus of Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas on Tuesday, March 25th from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. The featured speakers will deliver keynote remarks and participate in a discussion entitled The Future of American Leadership and Foreign Policy. Go to eventbrite.com and search Principles First to secure your tickets. See you in Dallas on Tuesday, March 25th.
And so when is it ultimately time for young adults to leave home?
That's a good question. I don't think there's a good answer to that. My thought went to when the parents are ready for them to leave home or the young adults ready to leave home. Okay. Sometimes the young adult pushes to leave home and the parents are thinking, oh, I don't think they can make it. I'm worried, but I think you got to give them the chance. Hey, I don't have a job and I'm going to just live with some buddies and I'll deliver pizzas or whatever. Well, how are they going to make it? They're not going to go into a training program or a college program. I think you just got to let them go. I mean, you can't stop that. But sometimes the young adult is in ways indicating they need to be moving out on their own. At least one indication of that is that they don't seem to be willing to go along with the rules and the guidelines at home. And I distinguish between negotiable expectations and non-negotiables. So negotiables may be things like, whether you help out around the house and you cook some meals and clean up your room and do your laundry and stuff like that. I mean, they're not deal breakers, but the deal breakers are no violence, no drugs in the house, no damage to property, no stealing, stuff like that. So those are societal norms. If these kids don't learn those at home, it's not an easy world out there. There's no unconditional love in the world. That's a home thing. It's not a outside the thing. So kids can sometimes say, I want to leave, and parents should, okay, let's try to work toward that. And sometimes they can act out, which I say is another way of saying they don't want to live there. But I don't encourage parents to say, well, then get the heck out of here. If you don't like the rules, make it a big, angry kind of confrontational thing. Say, hey, it looks like you just really want to live someplace else where maybe you have some different rules and you can come and go as you please or whatever. That's fine. We'll help you. We'll help you get into an apartment. We'll give you some furniture. So even if they're acting out, I try to have the parents work with them to leave, not just kind of say, okay, you're on your own, get out of here, because that's a way to keep that positive connection with it. Does that make sense to you?
It does. It does make sense. So on the other end of the scale, when the parents want the child to leave and the child refuses to leave, when should a parent evict that child?
Yeah, there was a case about 3 or 4 years ago. Michael Matumba or something, I think his name was, somewhere in Boston area. He's 32 years old, and the parents had tried to ask him to leave, and he wouldn't leave. It made national news, and finally they've got a judge to evict him. So there's pictures of him packing his car, leaving. And I think it was a situation where, it's kind of the movie Failure to Launch. Matthew McConaughey played that role, where the guy's just taking advantage of the home. I don't have to work that hard, and I can just kind of take advantage of the food and room and board and stuff. I really don't have to do much. So I would, I don't think that parents should or would typically get to that point of the eviction, but to say, look, I would have had coached those parents to say, hey, Michael, I think his first name was Michael. It's obvious you don't, it's not working for you here. You need to have more freedom, more independence. It's just not helpful to you. So we're going to help you. Okay. We're going to help you get that apartment that you need. We're going to help you find some friends that you can live with, and we'll help you get a job. Maybe we can help you with some interviews or get to an interview or whatever. But it's not working, and we'll work with you to help you find a place to live on your own. So.
Yeah, that's definitely an extreme situation.
Yeah.
So let's talk about something like more mainstream. Let's say a young adult is early 20s. How much involvement do young adults actually need from their parents, assuming there's no dire financial situation?
Yeah. Parents are still the number one resource for young adults. When they want to talk about personal problems, they're more apt to talk to their parents than their peers in terms of some current research. So parents, I think, still play this kind of important consultative role. They can no longer be directing, but they can be very helpful in a consultative way. And a lot of times these young adults in their late teens and early 20s have not developed good life skills. I think that wasn't necessarily the case in the past because they're pretty much dropped on their own, figure it out. But, how to do a checkbook, I would have to say I don't think my kids could change a tire. I don't think any of them have ever changed a tire. I don't think they know where the dipstick is in the car. If I said, find the dipstick, what's that? So parents can be helpful in that regard. And I always say, trying to coach parents on being a consultant. A consultant gives advice and experience and knowledge, information, but then the person or the company says, thank you very much, we'll make our own decision on it. So I say, I don't think parents should just say, I'm not going to say anything unless I've asked my opinion. That doesn't work for me. So I give my kids the opinion, but I always set it up this way. I say, hey, I want to tell you my experience and what I think some things you should think about, but it's your decision. But I just want you to offer my input. And then I'll say, I call it kind of a sandwich approach. The first slice of bread is that. It's your decision. I'm going to give you some input. I give them some input. Here's some things to consider. And then the next slice of bread is, now remember, it's your decision. I'm not going to be mad at you if you disregard or you choose a different path or whatever. And that really works well. And my kids certainly chosen to do different things than I would do. But I feel like I've at least offered that perspective to them, and they receive that pretty well.
Okay. So can a child actually be launched and still live at home?
Oh, hey, great. That's a great question. I'm glad you asked that question, because my definition of a launched young adult has nothing to do with where they live. Okay? It really has to do with, are they self-sufficient? Are they responsibly independent? Are they financially independent? And do they have a good relationship with their parents? So they can do that at home, or they can do that outside the home. If they're at home and they're working, they should be paying rent. They should be cooking some meals. They should be cleaning the house and helping out with chores and keeping their own living space up to speed, doing their own laundry and all. I always tell parents, if you have a young adult living at home and they're working full time, they're a roommate. They're not your 15-year-old kid. They're a roommate, and you should treat them that way and expect that they participate in an adult-to-adult manner as a roommate. So I'm glad you brought that up, because too many people, and there's kind of a bias in this country that, if you're in your early 20s or at least mid 20s or something, you're still at home, something's wrong. And unfortunately, parents tend to buy into that. What's wrong? What am I doing wrong? They don't want to tell their friends that their son or daughter's still living at home, and the young adult doesn't want to tell his friends they're still living with mom and dad. That's a cultural bias. I did a podcast with a guy in India, and he said, in India, if you're 23, 24, 25, and you're living outside the home, that's a cause for concern. Because there, 70 to 80% of young adults are living at home. It's a multi-generational home, and that's the norm. So we're kind of this independent culture, and hey, you should be on your own and tough it out and all that. So I think there's a kind of a bias that you should be out on your own by 20 something at least. So,
yeah, I've got that specific situation with my daughter, my youngest daughter, who's 25 years old. And she has a daughter. She had a daughter very young. She was about 21, I believe. And so she moved back in with us. And so we're helping take care of the grandchild. And she has a job. She pays the bills. She pays rent. So she's self-sufficient.
You're in that multi-generational kind of household. And that's actually some trend in that direction right now, too. There's more of that, partly driven by economics, so, and I don't think it's a bad thing. There's a colleague of mine who's writing a book in this area on multi-generational living in the United States. I'm kind of interested to see what she finds. She's kind of a researcher, writer, so.
Okay, I'll have to look into that too. So what do you say to someone who says, I'm afraid my young adults can't make it on their own?
Yeah. And so I've got a good example of this I think sometimes the anxiety of the parent is a contributor to the anxiety of the young adult. I have a young adult that I've worked with over quite a number of years who is on the autism spectrum and also has ADHD. And when he was living at home, they wanted him to learn to drive. And so he had his permit, he'd get in the car and the mother would say, do you want to drive? And he could feel her anxiety. And he said, no, I don't want to drive. Because it made him anxious and he knew she was anxious and he didn't want to drive if she's anxious, So they did an interesting thing. They got a friend from church to teach him how to drive. And he passed his test on the first time out.
Nice.
He's now been able to move out into an apartment. He has a full-time job and everything. But the parents have all along the way had this apprehension. Can he do this? Well, maybe it's too much for him. They know he's in this label, and I think parents tend to, even with these, if they're diagnosed on the autism spectrum or they have a learning disability, even physical disabilities, I think parents tend to underestimate and don't stretch them as much. And I found with this particular group, I call them this kind of disabled group, they all want to be more independent too. So, so parents need to help them be as independent as they can, because that's something they're wired up to be more and more independent. But yeah, parents have to learn to calm themselves down and step back and be able to watch, at times their kid fail and it doesn't work for them. And then talk to them, well, what did you learn from that? And how can you prevent that from happening in the future? And not kind of jump in and take over or take away the consequence. So.
All right. So what type of myths do parents believe that cause them undue suffering?
Oh, yeah. I always talk about, this self-inflicted wounds that occur when parents have certain beliefs. And the three that I think are critical. One is that I can control my young adult, which, it's not the case. If they're over 18, our society holds them accountable. And, we're no longer accountable for them in terms of our being able to control their behavior. And we have some leverage if they're living at home. You can say, well, you got to live someplace else. And we've talked a little bit about that. But that's a starting point, because parents still think I can somehow control them. And then, the second one really is that I'm responsible for their behavior. No, they're adults. They're responsible for their behavior. And that goes back to some of the guilt. Well, maybe they wouldn't be acting this way if it hadn't been for something that I did or didn't do in the past. And you have to let go of that. And that's where I might talk about you need to apologize, let go of that. And then the third one is really I can fix my young adult. I can change them. That kind of ties into the control issue in the beginning. And you got to let go of that too. They've got to be able to learn to stand on their own, and you can't fix them. So if parents have those underlying beliefs that are kind of operating inside their heads, they're just going to have a lot of pain with that. It's going to bring a lot of unnecessary suffering.
All right. So what's the worst case scenario if young adults fail to launch?
Yeah, when I start to think about this one category of young adults who have serious mental health problems, and these are ones that likely will end up on Social Security disability. They have a major mental health problem and likely can't live at home. I have one young man like this, his late 20s. The parents have pretty much said, you cannot come home because he's threatening and violent, so you can't come home. But he's got Social Security disability, and the parents help out a bit with some expenses, and the dad takes him some groceries. The dad works at volunteers at a co-op on Saturdays and takes some groceries over to him once a week. But it's kind of a heartbreaking situation because it's not going to get a lot better. And the other person that fits into this category is the drug addicted, the person with addiction. And I pretty much say you're not going to get a lot of progress toward independence if you don't address that mental health issue or that drug addiction issue. I come out of an experience of working in the drug and alcohol field, and I'm a believer that you're kind of spinning your wheels and wasting your time if you're not dealing with the drug issue that's involved. There's another worst case scenario, maybe even worse than those two, and that's the estranged young adult. And I've had a few of these situations where the young adult has cut off communication with the parents completely. And in some cases, the parents don't know why. Maybe they've made efforts to reach out to the person. I had one mom, the daughter got married, grew up in the family, was always close to the mom. The college, they were close, and the wedding went well. And then about 6 months after the wedding, the young adult, her daughter wrote and said, my husband and I have decided to raise our children apart from any family influence. So we're not going to have any more communication with you. And my husband's not communicating with his family. And in fact, she and her husband cut off relationships with friends too. And it was very heartbreaking. And at one point, the mother and father went down and were outside the apartment that this young girl lived in, and said, "We're outside," and her daughter said, "Go away," not open the door.
Wow. So
this woman is just heartbroken about this, and I don't know if it'll ever change. I'm hoping. We have 1 out of 4 now young adults cut off communication with parents for some period of time during their young adult years. Now, good news is that most of them kind of come back and reconnect at a certain point in time, but there are some that cut off indefinitely and just have never have any more communication with their parents. If your audience people are facing that issue, a good recommendation is a book called The Rules of Estrangement, The Rules of Estrangement by my colleague, Josh Coleman. So if you've got some cutoff going on with a young adult, that would be a good resource for you.
Okay. So if you've got teenagers now, what can you do? What process can you take to ensure they're prepared to launch when the time comes?
Yeah. Well, I think it's kind of a logical or kind of that makes a certain amount of sense to look for ways to challenge them to be more independent or take more responsibility for decisions that they make and actions, So whether that be, getting a job, whether that's making decisions about their schoolwork, decisions about whether they go to college or to trade school, and to be able to start to back off on doing things for them. So if they want to buy something, well, you're going to need to get a job. I bought a few things for you in the past, but now things have changed, and it's time for you to step up and get your own money, and then you can buy some of these things that you want to buy. And that teaches them that beginning to a sense of self-sufficiency, and that they can, in some ways, take care of themselves, because they're delivering pizzas to get some money. They may buy a new Xbox or something. All right, I understand the concept here. If I work, I get money, I can buy things for myself. So if parents buy all those things for them and continue to take care of them, I think that just extends this kind of dependency. I think some of these trust fund babies, where they have this trust fund money and they don't really have to earn anything, I think are often not particularly independent or happy, and I talk to parents that just because you have money doesn't mean you need to be taking care of your kids or buying a lot of stuff for them. So,
all right. So as we wind down this conversation, I have one more question for you. I usually like to end with something positive. So do you have any positive news or information you can share with parents today in these situations?
The one thing I'd say is that parents probably need one thing more than anything else, and that's patience, because it's taken longer to launch these days. And I can't tell you the exact percentage, but I'd say 80, 90% of the young adults are going to land on their feet eventually. They may hit some bumps along the way. Right now, young adults are changing jobs 7 times during their 20s. They don't settle into a career until their early 30s. They're not, the first age of marriage for young adults, males now is 30. For females, it's 29. 40, 50 years ago, it was 23 and 21. So I'm just saying, you have to have some patience. It's taking longer. Don't just use your own experience where 18, I left home and my folks said, see you later. That model is not going to work with today's young adults. But be optimistic, and I guess my message is to say, to most of these parents, it's going to work out. They'll be okay. Just have a little patience, continue to be loving, but also be firm, and your kids are going to land on their feet eventually. So.
All right, so that's a good way to wind up this episode. So Dr. Jack Stoltzfus, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a great learning opportunity for me and the listeners.
Good, thank you very much.
So my new website is www.podcastreallife.com. If you go there, you can find links to every platform that carries this show. You can also find sponsor links and subscription information. That's www.podcastreallife.com. And it'll include a link to Dr. Stoltzfus' new book, Launch Code. So that's it for today's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another chance to learn from each other. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
That was Stories from Real Life. Join us again next week for another great storytelling journey. See you next time.